Hey guys, it's me, Marcelo Nostroza, back again for yet another video. This video will be vastly different from the usual fare on my channel in that this is the first video that I have a proper guest on my channel. I met him through a mutual friend of ours, and it turned out after a while, I thought that we had very, very good chemistry. We, both of us have an affinity for British TV when it comes to Doctor Who. And I have been looking for someone to have a discussion with me about one of my favorite British shows, Sherlock. I was lucky enough to ask him, and he was so generous to join me on my mission to review and discuss every episode of season 1 of the BBC's Sherlock, created by Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss. I really hope that you guys enjoy our discussion about episode 1, entitled A Study in Pink. I'm joined by my friend Geek and Reviews. Yeah, so tell them a little bit about yourselves.
I'm a Scottish YouTuber covering not as much geek stuff as I should. You can check out my channel, the Geek in Review, or follow me on Twitter at the Geeks Reviews. Doing a lot of Marvel stuff at the moment, and then hopefully a lot of Star Trek stuff when we get whatever shows are coming our way towards the end of the year.
Before I tell you, Geek and Review, how I first came upon the show, what was sort of your introduction to the world of Sherlock as given to us by Stephen Moffat and his partner and the BBC?
If I'm trying to think back, I'm sure it was on around New Year's Day in the UK, because it became a sort of event that would be shown on the 1st of January, and I remember that. And there was a lot of buzz because Stephen Moffat had written, sort of the good Doctor Who episodes at the time. And I think, was Matt Smith the Doctor when this started? I can't remember if he was. But yeah, it was when Stephen Moffat was really going from someone who was a sci-fi fan of Doctor Who, knew his name, to everyone knew his name after this. And Mark Gatiss, he was part of a comedy troupe called the League of Gentlemen, and still is. So again, it was getting his name sort of separate from the group. But yeah, that's one of my first notes. Is I can't believe how long ago and how young everyone looks in it.
My first exposure to this series was basically through Stephen Moffat, because the only reason I know Stephen Moffat, you mentioned it, he was working on Doctor Who. I was just taken aback by how I'm a film guy, and I noticed little things in the opening credits of this episode. They list Stephen Moffat's name as written by, but in the creator credit, they say with Mark Gatiss. That is such a nerdy and a technical thing, but I found it so odd.
Again, thinking back in the time, Stephen Moffat was getting a lot of buzz. I don't know what it was like in the US or if you were following Doctor at the time, but certainly in the UK, given what he'd done with that, and a show that I've spoke to you about, you and I've recommended to yourself, called Jekyll, which is another reimagining of the sort of similar thing what he'd done with Sherlock, but no one watched it. It was only 6 episodes. Retelling of sort of modern tale of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was fantastic. So it was just a great build-up, and I think he'd maybe written the Tintin film at that time, but it hadn't come out yet either.
With that being said, this episode kicks off with what seems to be random murders of people committing suicide in the heart of London. The one thing that really stood out to me is when we first meet Inspector Lestrade and his quote unquote Sherlock hating partner Molly, when Inspector Lestrade is basically addressing the media and telling everyone not to panic, and he's trying to do his best to not cause panic. Almost everything that he says is followed by an insert shot of everyone in the room getting text messages going wrong. And I'm like, that is so cool. That is such a nice visual cue. It's like, you're wrong. Like every time. For me, the line of the scene was said by Inspector Lestrade, where he says, everyone is as safe as they want to be. But before he said that, just don't commit suicide. I found his ineptitude to be unbelievably concerning, but funny at the same time. What did you think about that?
Yeah, well, I remember at the time thinking exactly what you thought about having the text on screen with the text message was absolutely brilliant, because I think it had been done a little bit in movies, but it hadn't been done this way, certainly on a television show and not a big television show. And as well as that, at the time it seemed kind of wondrous, but now it's like Sherlock just created a group chat. That's something that we do every day now. Technology's kind of caught up with the wonderment of it. But yeah, Lestrade being inept, I think you have to make your hero look good straight away. And they sort of do build a relationship in later episodes, but obviously we're only going to talk about the first one just now.
I really like that this incarnation of Sherlock is told through the eyes of John Watson. And John Watson has recently come back from the war in Iraq, and he is seeing a therapist that thinks he is suffering from a symptomatic tremor. But it turns out that we find out later in the episode when we meet Sherlock's brother, who is basically the British government. He says, you have an intermittent tremor. And it's not because you're in shock, it's because you actually miss the action and all the excitement. I thought that particular take on John Watson as a soldier was unique and interesting.
I mean, the way it starts and not introducing it through Sherlock's eyes is pretty brilliant. I think it's maybe 10 minutes before he pops up, 10 or 12 minutes. And that was really good. A lot of things were kind of doing that at the time, I think, off the back of Batman Begins, where they didn't have Batman for the first hour. But yeah, it was refreshing, because when you do meet Sherlock, it is sort of like all your senses are getting overwhelmed. And yeah, it's brilliant. It's good writing.
Why don't we just talk about the man of the hour? Why don't we talk about Sherlock? What was your first impression when you first saw him in the morgue beating up that body with a fucking riding crop?
Well, I remember I was more looking out for the sort of Sherlock things that the iconic things like the hat and the pipe, which they do bring into the show, but they don't bring it in a heavy-handed manner. So I was looking more for the modern adaptation of, I don't know if you'd call it the costume or the outfit, but yeah, again, it was going off the back of Doctor Who. He had a big long coat, obviously, and Watson was just kind of sort of plain guy in the background. But yeah, Sherlock, it was what I expected it to be, and it was a great way to sort of reintroduce Sherlock Holmes rather than being the Sherlock Holmes that I remember, because in the UK they showed like an old 70s version in reruns in the 90s, and it was like a guy in his 50s. So seeing a guy in his whatever age Benedict Cumberbatch was, early 30s or mid 30s, it was fantastic.
The thing that I love about the introduction scene of Sherlock, the second that John Watson steps in, without a word, Sherlock sizes up John Watson in a second. And I love the way that the director of this particular episode chose to do that. Sherlock doesn't introduce himself. He just says, I trust you're here because you're looking for a flatmate. John Watson is so enraptured by what Sherlock can do, basically his powers of deduction, that he's sort of blown away. I thought that his introduction scene was just fantastic.
Yeah, it brings a sort of danger to the character, and they hint at it quite early on. They don't really go into too much detail in the later episodes about Sherlock's drug addiction or his drug past. You just know that he has had a problem, and they hint at it, and he's got ways of coping. So again, it was a great way to bring a sort of, in my head was a stiff old man to be a sort of young guy in the present.
What do you think of Mrs. Hudson?
The first episode, she was there. I think again they're just filling in the checklist of things that you need to have. Like, I mean, you could have done the entire episode, and they were looking for a flat, and the flat that they found in the last scene was 221 Baker Street, but they bought that in straight away, and obviously we're bringing that in. You get Mrs. Hudson, so it's just ticking boxes, but it was good. It was fun. It was lighthearted.
My favorite of the first time that we see them in their flat is when Sherlock runs off to investigate another dead body who has mysteriously died of suicide. So we think, but John Watson, because he has a leg problem, stays in the flat, and he says, I could do with some tea and some biscuits if you got him, right? And yeah. Mrs. Hudson goes, I'm your landlord, not your housekeeper.
John Watson says as well, and I hadn't watched the episode in a few years till I watched it earlier on today, is he says, oh, my damn leg. I don't. That for me didn't work. That felt a bit unnatural. But I don't know.
The moment directly preceding that moment is the big moment. John figures out that he is missing the violence and the carnage of his military service. So he goes off with Sherlock to investigate the murder of this woman with a particularly nice pink coat. What did you think of that whole entire scene?
Sherlock leaves and he comes back and he clicks that, oh, you're a doctor, you're a medical doctor, you're a medical doctor that's seen violence, you're a medical doctor that's seen violence and has an injury. And he works it all out. I would argue that Sherlock Holmes isn't a genius. He's just got his mind so clear of all the shit that everyone else thinks about. He's not thinking about the Kardashians or YouTube or Twitter. He's just clear of that, and that he focuses on what he likes. So I would argue that he's not a genius. He just is able to focus entirely on what he wants and channel out all the background noise, because he doesn't really seem to worry about money or anywhere that he stays, and he's seems to be able to get a job when he wants. So that's my opinion on the modern Sherlock. But when they go to the crime scene, it was a good setup. Again, not discussing about later episodes, but they do sort of get the rhythm, I think, of the scenes a little bit better. But as an initial setup to how this is going to work and how this character works, it was really good.
When Sherlock steps into the room, we really get a good, firm idea of how Sherlock's mind works. It was just fantastic how he broke down that she was a woman in the media. She had several divorces, and the way that he could figure that out is by looking at a ring, and just figuring out that she was from Cardiff. That was amazing. But the moment that I loved, actually starts walking down the stairs and he has that epiphany moment. He just takes his hands together and he puts it together and he goes, there's a mistake. And he goes, where is it? Where's her briefcase? Where is it? Where's her pink briefcase? And he goes running down the fucking stairs and he just says, pink. Like, the selling point for me in this episode was the relationship between Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman. I think they played particularly well off one another. Minecraft was cool. I really liked his assistant that was like addicted to texting. It was so odd and off-putting. What did you think about that?
Moffat brings texting up quite a lot in Doctor Who as well. It was fun. But the initial episode does set out the dynamic, and I think they knew, they must have known, because they were shown, I think, 3 in a row, that they were going to get more than one episode, because otherwise, if this was a pilot, you're setting up, you're dropping quite a lot of big things and setting up things that might not pay off, because they knew they were getting the 3 1.5 or hour-long episodes. They could afford to do that, and in the first season, it definitely works. I know there's some criticism of some episodes, but as far as the dynamic of it goes, it lays out, this is how this sort of world works.
To sort of start wrapping up here, what did you think of the battle of wits between Sherlock and the cab driver once he figures out who's ultimately responsible for the whole thing, but who's the guy that's killing all these innocent people? So what did you think of that showdown with Sherlock and the cab driver in the library?
I remember thinking the cab driver was going to be Moriarty, and I thought, well, that would be cool, because having a really old Moriarty and a really young Sherlock Holmes would be very an interesting dynamic. And I honestly thought he was going to get away with it. And then you find out that it's not him, it's someone. It's going to be, the big bad that gets revealed. But yeah, John showing up and saving the day was good. It was to be expected. It was probably one of the few times that he did get to be that heroic in an episode, and it was the very first one. Usually he's just reacting, whereas this one he was a bit more reactive. But the cab driver setup, I at the time remember was convinced it was going to be Moriarty.
And when I first saw this pilot episode, I was really surprised that when Sherlock pressed the cab driver to figure out who is ultimately pulling his strings, I was really surprised that Stephen and Mark Gatiss brought up Moriarty this early. Then again, when I was watching this back on Netflix, I had been watching British television for a while, but I wasn't used to the format that they were doing. Frankly, I think, but I would have preferred more episodes?
1.5 hours was, I think it was quite ambitious, especially when it was 18 months between the first and the second season, or 2 years between the first and the second season as well. Two or 3 years between the seasons.
Ultimately, I thought I really, really enjoyed this episode. It was really cool for me to see one of the writers that I admire very, very much in a different area and taking on an iconic character like Sherlock Holmes. What are you looking forward to as we move forward here through Sherlock?
Didn't pick up on the first time, but I think, as I was saying about the whole text message group, group message or text, as technology has kind of aged this a little bit. I mean, I did write down in my notes that if this was today, John Watson wouldn't be a blogger, he'd be a TikTok star. But yeah, it's the dynamic of how it works and what it sets up.
My grade for this episode would have to be A plus. What would you give it?
B plus, no problem.
All right, guys, that'll do it for our discussion of Season 1 of Sherlock, EP1, A Study in Pink. Before I do my outros, if you liked my guest on this video, Geek in Review, I will leave a link to his channel in the description below. If you liked him on this review and you're wondering, is he going to stick around as I make my way through the wonderful British TV show called Sherlock? Yes, he's going to stick around. As a matter of fact, he's going to be with me for every single episode of Sherlock. So all of you have that to look forward to if you liked our dynamic and you liked the way that we chatted about Sherlock and kind of broke it down a little bit. All right, guys, so with all of that cosmetic stuff out of the way and done with, if you like this video at all, I would appreciate a comment, a like, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you've seen the episode, in the comments below, please tell me what you liked about it and tell me what you didn't like about it. But until next time, as always, I'll see you when I see you.
So much happened here and so much is about to.